Hi guys, welcome back to my channel and to today's video where I'm going to be sharing my top tips for drawing realistic animal eyes using coloured pencils. So if this is something that you really struggle with, like perhaps your values and that are in your eyes aren't quite right, or you're not getting that like sparkly look in your eyes, this is going to be the video for you, so make sure you carry on watching. Before we get into the tips though, I just want to mention that this eye study, along with a whole bunch of other in-depth real-time tutorials involving eye studies and wildlife, are available on my Patreon page and my website. So if you're really looking to level up your coloured pencil drawing, make sure you hop on over there because there's a whole bunch of stuff that's going to really help you out. So the first tip that I have for you is values. You really want to make sure that your dark areas are as dark as they possibly can be. Now this goes for the pupil, obviously, because that's like the really darkest part of an eye or an eye study, and also the outer eyelid areas and any eyelashes and all of that kind of thing. So I like to go in and outline all of these areas first, as you can see in the video clip here, and just make sure the shape is right, and then go in lightly and shade them again just to make sure that shape is right, and make sure they're kind of sitting well around the outside of the eye, like the eye is nice and spherical. And then I like to go in with a hard pressure on my pencil, which is usually a dark sepia pencil, and really kind of get that colour down in there and make sure that it's really nice and dark. Now don't always use just a dark sepia pencil. I like to go in with a walnut brown and couple that with a dark indigo pencil as well, because those two colours combined create a really lovely dark tone and gets a lot of depth into your dark tone, so it's not just flat one colour, you know, that kind of thing. If you are really struggling at getting that dark colour, perhaps you've kind of got like a bit more of a bubbly texture on your paper or something like that, don't be afraid to go in with a really hard pressure, because you're not putting like a base layer down, you're going straight in with a darker colour. There's no point putting in any lighter colours or anything like that, because that's just going to add extra layers that really don't need to be there. So you can go straight in with your darker colour, and you can go in with that hard pressure and really get that in. Also, don't be afraid to grab a black pencil or anything that's going to be really handy or useful to you to get that really dark tone. And you also want to make sure that you're constantly checking that dark tone as you're adding other areas around your eyes, because those colours that you're kind of adding into the iris and the fur or whatever's sitting around the outside is going to alter your dark tone as well. So make sure that you're constantly kind of reassessing and checking all of your darker tones and going back in and darkening them up if necessary. Next up is your highlights. So you really want to make sure that your highlights are singing to you and that they look really nice and sparkly. The way in which I do highlights is to take a white pencil. I like to use the Holbein soft white because it's really waxy, and any other colours that you kind of add over don't really stick to it that easily. So it's really nice if you're kind of wanting to add some dark areas around, because that dark area is not going to go into that light area. So I like to use a white pencil and define the highlight area, so get all of the shapes in, and I really pay close attention to the reference photo to make sure that I'm getting the shapes in correctly and in the right place. And then yeah, just go in and shade it. So this is a really important step, because a lot of people tend to leave their highlights just plain white, and I really hate that myself, because they don't look sparkly, they don't look alive when they're just kind of a paper white or just shaded with a warm grey one or something like that. I prefer, and I also advise students and anybody else that asks, to shade highlights with a blue pencil or a purple pencil, because that really gives life, and also it kind of, adding blue into white areas makes them look a lot whiter. Yeah, it's magic the way that it does that. But I like to add in a dark indigo pencil, because that dark indigo, because I've added it into the pupil, really plays together, and in the dark areas as well. So I use a dark indigo, sometimes a sky blue as well, and a little bit of Delft blue or violet or something like that to add into the highlight there, just to make it look a little bit more interesting and not just white, because let's face it, that looks a little bit boring. And then I also take the dark pencil, a black or a dark sepia, and I make sure that I add in any kind of reflections that I can see in that highlight. So if there's like a tree, I make sure to add in the kind of dark shadow area of the highlight in with the tree with that darker pencil. I also apply this method to any kind of water lines or highlights in the outer edges of the eye, so the eyelids. You can see on the bottom of my little one here, I've kind of got like a little shiny bit in the inner eye corner, and then a little bit of like a water line. So that water line I have actually shaded with grey and a little bit of blue, and then the little shiny bit I've shaded with some sky blue, so it's not just pure white. My next tip for you guys, and what I see a lot of people struggling with, is the texture and like making sure that the iris, the coloured part of the eye, is really nice and smooth. And the way to combat that is to use circular motions with your pencil. So normally when we're shading fur, we kind of use back and forth in the direction that the fur is going, or whatever you're shading. In the case of eyes, I find that it's much better to go in with a small circular motion and make like little tiny circles that are overlapping each other, because that gets into maximum area of the tooth of the paper and creates a really nice smooth surface. And with eyes, you often see they are looking like really smooth and spherical. You don't see any kind of back and forth areas in your own eye. It's just really nice and smooth. So make sure you use circular motions, because it's going to help to smooth out your paper. And make sure you do that with all of your layers, and blend it with a lighter coloured pencil as well, using that same circular motion, because that's going to help to blend all of that colour out and create an even more kind of smoother surface, which is exactly what you are after. You can go in later on and add kind of all of those little nuances, those little eye details, which we're going to move on to in a second, which is one of my tips here. But yeah, make sure you're using those circular motions with all of your colours and getting like all of those areas in. My next tip is another thing which I often see a lot of people doing. They don't often add the shadows around the outer edge of the eye. So you really want to make sure that you do concentrate a lot of your darker colours. In this case here I've got darker greens and everything around the outside of the eye. Then you can see through the middle of the eye I've got it really nice and bright. And then as we come back towards the pupil, I'm adding in some more shadows as well. So you want to make sure that you're adding shadows around the outer edge where the eyelids are touching the eye, because you're going to get a natural shadow there. And also just make sure that you are darkening more towards the pupil, so from the pupil outwards, and it gets lighter, because that's going to help to create that spherical feel as well with your eyes and help it look all the more realistic. With those shadows, again, you want to make sure from the last tip that you're using a little bit of a circular motion and blending with your lighter colours as well, because that's going to help to blend those darker shadows into your lighter areas. You don't want to end up with patches of dark and patches of light. You want to make sure they're nice and smoothly blended. So when you are adding those shadows around the outer edge, make sure you're lifting the pressure off your pencil as you're moving towards the lighter areas. My last tip for you guys is to make sure that you add in details within your eye with a sharp pencil, and that you follow the curvature of the eye. So what I mean by that is obviously making sure your pencil is nice and sharp and you haven't got like a dull tip. Having that sharp pencil is going to help you really get those fine pinpoint little details that you often see within eyes, like little tiny dots that are in there, or any kind of wiggly lines which you often find in little cat eyes, like little veins running through, all that kind of thing. So you want to make sure your pencil's nice and sharp, because that's going to help you to really get those details in and get them looking really nice and crisp, and that's going to help add to the realism, because you've got all of this lovely colour blending of the colours of the iris. And then to help it look even more realistic, you want to go in with those really super fine details of those crisp lines and everything. That's just going to really amp up the realism in your eye. And then to follow the curvature of the eye. So obviously you've got the eye is a sphere or a circle. So you want to make sure that you're adding in those details, making sure you follow going around the kind of shape of the pupil and the shape of the eye. So you don't want to add in any kind of details or shading or anything just going straight up or straight across. You want to make sure that you're following that curvature, following that perfect curve of the eye coming round, because again that's going to help to add to the realism, and it's going to help to make your eye really stand out and look really nice and spherical. And yeah, so you want to make sure that you avoid going straight up or straight down. This applies to when you are shading as well, which is why I say to use those small circular motions rather than shading across or at an angle or anything like that. You want to use those small circular motions, and this applies to when you're adding in your shadows and details as well, just making sure that they follow the curvature a little bit. Obviously if you do have a detail that is really pronounced and standing out, and it is kind of like really jarring and going perfectly like vertical, then obviously add that in if it's like a pet portrait or something that you're drawing and it's a really standout feature. But generally you find that your details in your eyes tend to follow the curvature of the eye, and they kind of really curve round. Yeah, so you don't often find like really straight angular areas in the eye. So just to recap on the tips, you want to make sure that you check your values, make sure your dark pupil and your eyelids and everything are as dark as they possibly can be, and make sure you constantly check against any other colours that you've added and make sure they're staying really dark. Make sure that you add blues or other colours into your highlights so they're not just flat white. Use small circular motions to help create a smooth appearance when you're doing the iris. You want to make sure that you shade the edges around the pupil and the outer edge of the eye to make sure that it's looking got nice depth and looking really nice and circular, and to make sure you add the details in your eye with a sharp pencil and follow the curvature. Those are my top tips for you. If you want to check out other videos, you can over on the right, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Bye!